Hello everyone, this is part 8 of What If Deku Married Toga, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. There are so many smells wafting through the air. Concession stands selling hot dogs and other meats alongside vendors that mix caramel or churn cotton candy. It's enough to make any person salivate. Through all those different promising tastes, however, the scent that the ghoul amongst the crowd finds most alluring is that of a mouse scurrying about. The rodent feasts on all the unfinished snacks people leave behind, nibbling on the litter. The ghoul runs his tongue along his lips, adopting that idea. Where nobody will bother looking, Akatani takes a detour into an alley. The overstuffed trash cans and overloaded dumpster had drawn the mouse away from the crowded festival. Out of sight and in the dark during the day, Akatani stops for a quick bite. Literally, he sinks his teeth into the mouse, fangs digging into flesh so easily. The blood doesn't just seep from the screeching rat, it gushes out in a rush like a bursted balloon. As though it too couldn't wait to get in the ghoul's mouth. The taste is bitter, not sweet like a human. Akatani almost spits it out. Yet, it's better than nothing. He doesn't know if he could withstand the festival if he doesn't take this precaution. When a little girl had fallen and scraped her knee, he could barely hold himself back. A small snack to hold him over to his next meal suddenly seemed like a good idea to him. If a mouse is the best he could find on such short notice, then it'll have to do. Once he's finished, he wipes the blood smeared across his mouth with his sleeve. It'd be easier to explain a red stain there instead of on his face if anybody asks. Though he doubts anybody will if even Himiko doesn't once he meets up with her. The blonde latches onto that same arm, wrapping both of her own around it and squeezing. The seats Todoroki had gotten are pretty good. They're just shy of the front row, but that's good considering the placement of the bleachers and not having to worry about heads getting in the way. Himiko snuggles against Akatani's side, pushing his arm up and over her shoulders to wrap around. When the boy looks down at her with surprise, she feigns innocence with a smile that doesn't flash her fangs. Akatani blushes and looks away, but doesn't retract his arm. He's aware of how much they must look like a couple being so close together. Part of him wonders if they actually are. Having no experience with girls, he's not sure what their relationship status currently is. It's not like he can muster up the courage to ask her either. The two of them share moments where he thinks that she likes him just as much as he likes her, but he's too afraid to ruin their friendship. And considering Himiko's personality, he figures that's just the way she acts around everybody. He's grateful that the sports festival is beginning its first event, since that ought to take his mind off it. Classes are being called out onto the massive field where a wheel will decide how they'll compete. Akatani searches the crowd of hero hopefuls and other UA students, looking for Todoroki or Shinso. Instead, he spots someone from his childhood. Absent-mindedly, Akatani pulls Himiko a little closer to him, his hand gripping her shoulder a bit harder than it should. The small smile on his face is partially forced, but he can't help but admit to admiring his old friend. Of course Kaken would get into UA. The boy had been gifted with a quirk suited for heroics and his tenacity makes him as equally perfect of a hero candidate. As a matter of fact, when the boy is called to the podium for having the highest score in UA's practical exam, he declares that he's going to win the festival with sincere determination. Himiko notices Akatani's internal crisis from beside him. She takes his free hand in hers, hoping to pull him back to reality. Feeling her soft touch, he does get drawn to the girl. His eyes gaze into hers, green staring into yellow. The compromised emotional state each of them share are locked away and hidden behind those lenses. For a moment, they allow one another to catch a glimpse of that vehemence. Akatani swallows, his mouth dry. Himiko's eyes are so similar to a feline's that they can sometimes seem predatory. They remind him of his own from time to time. He forces himself to look away, returning his attention to the sports festival. He's content enough with her soft hand in his rough one. So long as she holds him in place here, he doesn't have to feel like being out in public is a risk. Or so he hopes. When he hears Aizawa's voice through the stadium speakers, that helps to sober him up as well. He wasn't expecting Eraserhead to be a part of this year's commentary with present Mike. He partially wonders if Eri is in the booth with them overlooking the show as well. He hopes so. He hopes she gets to enjoy the games and the performances from such a good view. Thinking of her and the underground hero makes him squeeze Himiko's hand. He has to stay grounded for all of their sakes. Losing control and letting himself loose here of all places wouldn't do any good. He sighs, slouching in his seat. Knowing how long the sports festival can be, he may as well get comfortable. Though the first tournament does go by rather quickly. That could have to do with the fact that it was a foot race through an obstacle course. The participants navigated through a terrain of massive robots and over a canyon before coming to a minefield. That's where Todoroki had a face-off with Kaken, each of them using their quirks to cross the grounds faster than the rest of the races. It was quite the spectacle. The crowd cheered and awed over the close finish. Todoroki had taken first place and Kaken second, wowing even Akitani. He hadn't expected his childhood friend to be beaten. Kaken never lost as far as Akitani was concerned. He could hardly believe his eyes that he had to rub them and blink back a few tears. Maybe times had changed. Maybe Kaken isn't the same kid that he remembers. After all, even he had changed over the years they split apart. When an explosion goes off down in the arena below, Akitani takes it back. Kaken still has a short fuse to go along with his dynamite detonating quirk. Though coming in first place, in the end, worked against Todoroki. For the second challenge, remaining players were given headbands with points based on their race placements. The less time it took to cross the finish line, the higher the number. When it's announced that to win the second round, participants must capture other people's headbands to earn the most points, Todoroki practically has a target over his head. Akitani winces, sympathizing with his friend. He doesn't envy being in that predicament, but does partially wish he could help somehow. The second round is a cavalry battle where players must partner with each other to make groups of 4. So at least Todoroki isn't alone. Akitani is relieved to see Shinso joining the team at the very least. Some pink-haired girl with a bunch of gadgets also willingly comes over to offer her services. Akitani had been worried that Todoroki would have trouble convincing people to work with him, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The game ought to go on to be an interesting one. All the teams rush Todoroki at once. Todoroki throws up an ice wall to shield he and his team long enough to fly away with a jetpack, shocking the audience. What doesn't surprise Akitani, however, is Kaken finding a way to pursue the dual-quirked boy even when airborne. Kaken uses his explosions to fly after Todoroki, creating an aerial battle. Akitani leans forward, engrossed by the compion he's witnessing. Shinso says something that gets Kaken to respond. Then, the Insomniac's quirk takes effect. Kaken freezes up and falls out of the sky like a plane that's run out of fuel. Akitani momentarily worries that his childhood friend is going to lose, or get hurt, but relaxes when the blonde's team catches him. It was a close call. Close enough that Kaken doesn't try it again. Unfortunately for Todoroki, his jetpack actually does run out of fuel. He and his team are forced to land. As soon as he does, all teams converge on him all over again. He tries freezing them all in place, but that only delays them briefly. He's forced to rely on the teammate he had join him at the last minute. The tall blue-haired boy with glasses who has engines in his calves reveals a trump card. Those leg thrusters rev to their maximum potential before launching the team like a rocket. They cross the field to the opposite side in a matter of seconds, buying them some more time. It seems Todoroki's strategy is stalling for as long as he can. Though Akitani isn't sure for how much longer his friend will be able to keep that up. There are just too many opponents surrounding him with too long of a countdown to the end. Especially since Kaken is one of those compeers, blasting towards him at max speed. The blonde reaches for the headband, about to snatch it away. And then, Todoroki's left side ignites with flames. Kaken instinctively retracts his hand, avoiding the fire. And then redirects himself with his explosions to prevent crashing into the ground. Todoroki's flames recede just as quickly as they had appeared. The brief exchange has both of them shaken and Akitani even more invested in their match. He's not sure who to root for or what to expect from either of them anymore. Just at the height of the compion, the timer hits 0 and the buzzer sounds, indicating that the round is over. Akitani lets out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. A much-needed intermission begins, allowing Akitani to excuse himself. He goes to the bathroom to splash some water on his face, to regain control of his senses, to do something to keep himself under control. It's becoming increasingly difficult to regulate his instincts. So when he catches a whiff of blood, he nearly loses himself. His nostrils flare and he staggers back from the rush of adrenaline that hits him like a wave. Akitani's hand catches the doorframe, crushing the cement as he squeezes it like a stress ball. Akitani's vision blurs despite the enhancement that his Kakugan grants him. He covers his exposed eye with the hand that had been clutching the doorway. When he lifts his head, he sees the source of blood exposure. A familiar skeletally skinny blonde coughs into a napkin. It takes a moment for Akitani to remember. The man was a customer at Anteiku. He must be sick. The boy swallows the saliva that's been accumulating in his mouth. The unhealthy blonde drops his napkin into the trash disposal before walking towards the exit. Akitani nearly trips over himself as he tries to get out of the way. The man is polite as he passes by. "Excuse me, young man," unaware of the ghoul's desire to feed. Akitani wants to respond, to warn the man, but he's too afraid of what'll happen if he opens his mouth. He doubts such a sick person would be able to defend themselves if he loses control. Or, a much younger blonde suddenly comes along to tend to the ill elder. The healthier human pauses when he spots Akitani, voice catching in his throat. "Are you all right?" He pays the boy no mind and returns his attention to the man who had been coughing up blood. Akitani internally wonders if they're related. Perhaps the older blonde is the younger one's father or grandfather, he figures. The frail father figure places a comforting hand on the fellow blonde's much sturdier shoulder. "I'm fine, young Togator." But Togator doesn't seem all that convinced. He reluctantly turns around to head back up to the bleachers, "If you say so." Akitani backs into the bathroom, watching them leave. He's extremely aware of his heartbeat, and all the blood pumping through his veins to make it pound so hard. That was too close of a call. More than he knows. He nearly vomits from the amount of anxiety, but only coughs up some spittle. He's disgusted with himself. Disgusted that he nearly devoured such a defenseless man. Disgusted that he dug into the trash disposal to recover the blood-stained napkin. A quiet police precinct is a bad omen. The lack of commotion is reminiscent of the calm before a monstrous storm. It feels like the start of a new saga. Naomasa closes the door to his office, hoping that it'll be enough for him to bunker down when the predicted chaos hits. The detective's tan overcoat and hat hang from a wooden stand, matching the man's demeanor once he plops into his seat. Even though Tamakawa ordered him a new chair to replace the damaged one, he can't get quite as comfortable as he'd like. A gooseneck lamp gives him a dim light to read over reports that still need filing. But he first has to resolve the case that came before those. He uses the landline phone provided by the precinct, dialing a Razorhead's number. After a few rings, the underground hero picks up. Naomasa forces back a sigh of relief, expecting to have gotten Aizawa's answering machine instead. "I don't have time for courtesy calls," Aizawa's voice grumbles from the other end of the line. He sounds tired, per usual. Like he had just been woken up by the phone ringing. Knowing the underground hero, that's likely the case. Naomasa closes his eyes, already frustrated with the man before they can even begin their conversation. Aizawa has a knack for giving him a headache. That's not exactly what I'd like to call these checkups, but they're mandatory. The detective chooses his words carefully as he broaches the reason for reaching out. "You're calling about the kid," Aizawa says matter-of-factly. There's an audible sigh through the phone before the underground hero grunts out, "I haven't heard from him." Naomasa sits up in his seat, rectangular eyes opening wide. "You haven't?" His grip tightens on the phone. "Don't you find that the least bit concerning?" Memories of the Tokyo Ghoul case when it first started slowly creeped their way into his thoughts. The excessive amount of violence. The devouring. When Naomasa doesn't even hear the underground hero's breathing anymore, he presses the phone closer to his ear and asks again, "Aizawa." Aizawa takes longer than Naomasa would have liked to answer. "This unorthodox approach was my idea. I'll take responsibility if he steps out of line." And his tone sounds much too reserved for such a serious matter. Naomasa shakes his head, glad that the underground hero can't see it. It's evident that Aizawa developed some sort of emotional attachment to the boy. It's going to be difficult discussing the topic. The detective struggles to help the underground hero think logically as he too attempts to think straight. He's not one of your students. He's a. Don't finish that sentence. Aizawa's harsh tone cuts the detective short. The line goes silent after that. Naomasa himself isn't sure what he was going to say about Akatani Mikumo, but he knows that it would have been regretted had he said it. Though grateful Eraserhead kept him from classifying a young boy as something more extreme, Naomasa still stays stayed. He swallows before saying, just don't forget the things that he's done. Though unable to see Aizawa's expression, the detective is sure that the underground hero will keep that in mind. Even so, Eraserhead doesn't assure him verbally, worry about catching real killers. Like Stain. The mention of another unresolved case gets the detective riled up. Stain is. But Aizawa is ruthless. In Hosu. You know where he's located and you aren't acting. A good number of heroes are assembling there to make up for our numbers, including Endeavor. Naomasa grits his teeth and caresses his forehead in an attempt to relieve some tension. You've never pushed this hard about Stain before. Did something happen? Ingenium. The underground hero's one-word response catches the detective by surprise. Stain's latest victim, Naomasa recalls the incident report and even has half a mind to dig it up. He instead settles on asking more directly, a tragedy, but what about him? He shouldn't have expected the relation to be to the underground hero himself. Of course Aizawa's answer would pertain to his kids. He's the older brother of one of my students. Oh. Naomasa sinks back into his chair with a hefty sigh. I think he's going to do something stupid. He accepted an internship in Hosu. Aizawa's tone suddenly has a hint of urgency that sets the detective's nerves on fire. Understanding what kind of intentions those actions imply, Naomasa is back to sitting up straight in no time, and you're going to let him take it. It'd do more harm than good to put that kind of pressure on him. He'd likely just go after Stain anyways. At least this way I can keep tabs on him. Naomasa had almost forgotten how logical the underground hero can be sometimes. With how dramatic Aizawa had been between his emotions high and his conspiracy theories, he'd have never guessed there could be any validation behind his decisions. The detective slaps a hand against his face as he tries to resist moaning in pain. So we've got two problematic kids and the hero killer. Whether the pain is mentally or physically, he couldn't say. Aizawa sounds as equally strained but almost assuring to some extent. Let me deal with the problem child and Ida. You just make sure neither has the chance to run into Stain. Unfortunately, it's much too late to prevent such an encounter, and any assurement otherwise would be misplaced. Akatani's absence from Aizawa has sent him spiraling. Straight into the night, the ghoul's limbs spin with his twisting body. The appendages latch onto sides of buildings and pull him from ledge to ledge. The ghoul is present among gargoyles, stalking the night itself. And right there with him, is another predator. The kind that hunts heroes. A self-proclaimed vigilante that utilizes a katana leaps rooftop to rooftop. He's just as starved for action as the ghoul is. He thirsts for the taste of blood on the tip of his tongue all the same. So when the two clash over the same prey that they had been stalking, it's to be expected. A low-level hero who had used his status to coerce a young woman into an alley where he could have his way with her. Both hunters deemed him worthy of their aggressive nature. He's now caught in the middle of their quarrel. The low-level hero cowers in the corner of a new alley, arms barely shielding his sight of the violent battle. Stain parries two strikes from the ghoul's limbs like venomous vipers he must fend off before moving with unnatural speed to avoid being impaled by a third. When he brings his blade down to go on the attack, it shatters under the pressure of a fourth limb. Stain stumbles before unsheathing a pair of daggers, ducking low under a high swipe of the ghoul's tentacles. He closes the distance between himself and his fellow predator, almost losing an eye but instead being cost an ear. His opponent is fast too, avoiding an upward slash. But not dodging the second blade that nicks his shoulder. The ghoul reels back with a reflexive flick of its tails, one slamming into the hero killer's chest. Stain is sent into a brick wall, rattling whatever parts of his ribcage that aren't broken. He hits the floor just as hard, but doesn't allow himself to lose consciousness. Whoever moves quicker than the other is who will win the match. What determines the turnout is whether Stain will be able to use his quirk before the ghoul can reach him or not. The hero killer runs his tongue along the bloodied end of the dagger in his hand as the ghoul pounces. Without an inch of coiling around the hero killer, the ghoul stops. The blood-curdling effect of Stain's quirk grabs hold of the frenzied creature, holding it in a place of suspended animation. The hold that the hero killer has over the ghoul is a form of paralyzation. Such incapacitation became the hero hunter's natural instinct in his way of fighting. The same way a Komodo dragon bites its prey and then waits. The patient are deadly. Stain snarls at the grotesque features of the ghoul's leather mask, deeming it unsightly as much as its quirk. You dare to intervene? He searches for a reason or a shred of conviction within the chasm that is the ghoul's eye. Finding nothing in the void, the hero killer rips the ghoul's mask off to see what kind of face hides beneath. Only to be shocked by what lies underneath. A face much too young to witness or partake in bloodshed stares back. You're just a boy, the hero killer falters momentarily, but quickly recovers, shaking off the initial surprise. Explain yourself. His growl doesn't expose any sort of inner turmoil. Nor does the blade that presses against Akatani's neck to usher a response. Whether it's due to the difficulty talking thanks to Stain's quirk or an act of rebellion, Akatani doesn't reply. The ghoul instead bares its fangs, the boy gritting his teeth together as he struggles to break free of the hero killer's quirk. For what reason? Foolish youth. Thrill-seeking, Stain doubts the interference of his hunt was anything noble. One look at the boy exposes his animalistic nature, an override of any proper sense or judgment. Through clenched teeth, the boy seethes. Can't help it. His lips don't move but his words formulate just enough for Stain's hearing to catch. Move on my own. The hero killer's eyes go from laser-focused narrowed slits to broad and baffled. He rarely misjudges people and their intentions, but the boy's reason touches him in a way he didn't expect. The few true pure-hearted heroes tell stories of how their bodies moved on their own to save lives. Stain begins wondering if the boy truly falls under that same category, fighting ferociously to save even a fake hero's life. Stain reconsiders that perhaps the boy is worth sparing. Little does he know that he completely misunderstood Akatani's angered answer. The boy's body hadn't moved to save the hero. It had moved to kill. To eat. The ghoul's starvation had reached a point so extreme that he could no longer hold himself back. When Stain leaves Akatani frozen in place, the boy considers himself anything but heroic. As a matter of fact, he starts worrying that he may be more villainous than the hero killer. The walls shake just as violently as the boy's bellicose body. With each feral swipe at nothing, there's an even more barbaric yell. Each cry is desperate, mercilessly clawing at his throat to climb out and escape. The pastry he had taken from Anteiku in a futile attempt to pacify his intense hunger rises to the surface of his widespread mouth too. He staggers, nauseous. He knew this would happen, and yet, he's still surprised by the violent backlash. Akatani clutches his stomach, the pit already emptied and his craving returned. His hands tremble as they climb up from his gut to his ribcage, clinging onto his upper sides. His fingers run along the thin slots that are between bones, those slits feeling more defined than ever. His brain feels like it's swelling beyond the capacity of his skull, to the point that his starvation is too obvious to ignore any longer. He's winded, ragged breaths coming faster than the cold sweat beading down his paling skin. Again, Akatani cries out in agony. His stomach lurches and gurgles. He raises his heavy eyelids halfway only for them to fall shut. The aching in his sides surges upward to meet the pain in his skull. There's something about hunger that robs the spirit as well as the body, until the ability to fight is completely stolen from him. The boy bends forward, puking out a mixture of the aforementioned half-digested pastry and bile. Saliva streams out as well, dripping from his quivering lips. His thinning body tremors too, shrinking in on itself. He locked himself in after the incident with Stain. Unable to resist his extreme urge to not only eat, but to hunt and kill, he had considered himself lucky to be stopped by the hero killer's quirk. That is until after the hunted hero fled the scene, slipping away during Akatani's brief conversation with Stain, prompting Stain to leave Akatani behind too. All alone in the alley and unable to move, all Akatani could think about was how starved he is. His hunger increased with every passing second that he returned to his home in order to be reclusive, where he wouldn't accidentally harm anyone that didn't deserve it. The hot dog vendor on Sakura Drive would have been an innocent victim. Devouring the group of teens spending their night ding-dong ditching the neighborhood would have made him a villain, not a vigilante. The ghoul claws at himself, wanting to be let out. Akatani's ribs are truly a cage, and the bones are the less than sturdy bars. He twitches and wraps his arms around himself even tighter. Pastries won't satisfy him. Not even if Aizawa were here to erase his quirk. He's waited too long. It's past the point of no return. As though the mere thought of the underground hero is enough to summon him, Akatani's cell phone rings. The caller ID shows that it's Aizawa who is trying to reach him. The boy is unable to answer, the drool pooling out of his mouth making it impossible to form a sentence. So he lets it ring. And ring. The insistent sound agitates him. It's like a bell calling him for dinner, but there's no meal on the table. Eventually, it ends, and the call goes to voicemail. Aizawa's voice filters through the phone as he leaves a message, Mikumo. You haven't been returning my calls. It's been a while since you last ate and I've recovered well enough that you should. Aside from that, a familiar younger voice interrupts, raising in volume with an added rustling, indicating that it's getting closer. Akata ni, Eri chirps like a bird singing a song. Eri really wants to see you. Aizawa continues as though the little girl hadn't just grabbed the phone from him. Akatani can hear the smile on the man's face though. There's a pause after that before Aizawa adds, I would like to see you again too. To make sure you're doing well. Akatani lets out a deep guttural growl as loud as his stomach's growling. The thought of Aizawa in front of him, a thin human, but a sack of meat nonetheless, the thought of flesh is enticing. Call me back soon. The underground hero ends the message he's leaving. Akatani fixates on the man's voice. He imagines Aizawa's throat. He imagines sinking his teeth into it. Eri would be with the underground hero too. She would run straight into Akatani's arms for a hug. It would be so easy to crush her. Like a boa constrictor or a python, he wouldn't even need to use his cocoon. She's small, but she'd make for a delicious appetizer. The ghoul salivates as he fantasizes digging into her muscle tissue. Then, he stops. Akatani freezes in place when he realizes what he just pictured. The horror dawns on him. He had just imagined feasting on Eri. He had wanted to not only harm her, but to eat her. He screams more violently than he ever has in his entire life. He hadn't roared at the top of his lungs like this ever since the night he devoured his own mother. Tears stream down his face as he pivots in hysterics. The room spins like his head as he stumbles around. Disgusted with himself, he throws his own body against the nearest wall. The impact leaves an indentation, destroying the sheet rock. He doesn't care. Akatani's cocoon sprouts from his back, tentacles whipping without rhyme or reason. The appendages are as frantic as he is. Fallen into a self-focused frenzy, he crashes into his table and shatters it. The tails swing so strongly that his body twists with them and he's sent spiraling into the kitchen. Akatani slams into a counter, shattering the ceramic. He wants to destroy himself, but all that he's capable of damaging is his home. Everything easily breaks under the sheer force of his cocoon, but his body doesn't even bruise when he rams it into a piece of furniture. So he keeps screaming. At the top of his lungs, he yells out all of his pent-up frustration. The thought doesn't cross his mind that his neighbors may call the police or a hero may come out of concern of the cry for help. He's too engrossed in his own self-loathing to do much thinking anymore. His mind races, overwhelmed by a series of screeching. He can't release the same type of terrible noise, but he comes close. The hunger is one thing, but the desire to harm the ones he loves is too much for him to bear. He'd already killed his past life as Izuku Midoriya. He doesn't want to lose another. Akatani sinks slowly, falling to his knees. His shoulders shake and his body crumbles as it's racked with extreme surges of sobs. Then, something soft grabs onto those same shoulders. The feeling is light. It doesn't add to the heavy weight leaning on them. Whatever it is, it's calming. A tender touch. Akatani looks up, trying to see through the tears obscuring his vision. What he sees is a blur. But he recognizes the shape. The blonde buns. The feminine form. Akatani's blackened eyes widen, the corners cracking so much that the exposed red veins start to seep blood. At the epicenter of the dark void, each red iris shrinks as they focus on the subject in front of them. Himiko Toga. Her pale flesh ripe for the taking. All he has to do is reach out and take it. His fangs are sharper than hers. He can kill. He can eat. He can kill. He can fight it. He can resist the urge. Barely. Akatani's eyelids slam shut, closing as tight as possible. He seals off the sight of a perfect meal's beauty. It's a desperate attempt to make the blonde not appear as appetizing. But he can still smell her. Her scent is enticing. His nostrils flare as he inhales. Akitani shakes his head as hard as he can, hoping it flies off. It's just as difficult to formulate a coherent sentence as it is to hold back his instinct, but he has to warn her. Shouldn't be here. He grinds his gritted teeth as drool pulls out from the corners of his mouth. He barely hears Himiko trying to respond. She's probably been saying stuff to him all this time, but his other senses had overwhelmed him to the point of tuning her out until now. He tries to focus on the sound of her voice. Not the organs that make it possible for her to speak, not her slender throat. Just her words. He hears her words. It's okay, he stops listening. It's not okay. She doesn't know. He can't expect her to understand. He shouldn't blame her, but she doesn't comprehend the danger she's in. Akitani pushes her away. Or, that's what he wants to do. He just wants to distance himself from her so that she's safe from harm. He means to do so gently. Instead, he shoves her. He lashes out with a shout and tosses her across the room. Hearing her cry out in surprise, opening his eyes to see what he's done. His hands tremble in front of him. The same hands that threw her. He tucks them into his armpits, bending over so that he can't see her pained expression. He's afraid. Afraid that he'll hurt her. He already has. Akitani whines as he tries not to hurt her again. He turns his head away, trying to focus on something else. If he doesn't see her, he might not want to hunt her. That's what he hopes for anyways. His eyes land on the door. Its hinges are broken and it's wide open. Himiko must have kicked it in. She must have come by to check on him, heard his screaming, and broke in to make sure he's safe. Akitani lowers his head, staring at the ground. He'd made the mistake of thinking about the blonde again. Akitani. Himiko tries getting his attention. The boy covers his ears, attempting to block her out. Akitani. Himiko tries again, shouting this time. She grabs his wrists and pries his hands away from his ears so that he can hear her. Akitani, look at me, she pleads. Akitani doesn't want to. He knows what'll happen if he does. He won't be able to contain himself. He'll attack her. Just knows he will. But that part of him wants to. It wants to attack. It wants to rip and tear past her skin. It wants to chow down on her intestines. The ghoul wants to look at its next meal. Akitani raises his head, no longer in control of his own body. He's shocked by what he sees. She's presenting herself to him. She's actually offering her neck to him. The left side of her cardigan is slightly pulled down, exposing her shoulder where a black bra strap is. She's blushing, but not like she usually does. This time, she's bashful. She's shy. It makes Akitani blush too. For more reasons than one, he's drawn to her. Bite me. Her voice is as tiny as her size, but it's also genuinely inviting. Akitani gawps at her, not believing what he's hearing or seeing. When her yellow eyes meet his dark voids, however, he feels a familiar sense of kinship that has him believing. He leans forward, part of him still hesitant and trying to resist out of fear that he'll go too far. But another part of him is unable to help himself. He wants to tackle her and go straight for the jugular. But he can't bring himself to do that to her. He has to hold himself back. He has to. Himiko is tired of waiting. She lurches at him first, striking suddenly. Her fangs sink into the spot between his own neck and shoulder, breaking skin and biting flesh. Akitani gasps in shock, and partly pleasure. It doesn't hurt as much as he would have expected, but it does catch him by surprise. It also does something to him instinctively. He's not just driven by an animalistic urge to feast or fight, but to bite back and assert his dominance. Akitani bites Himiko hard. She lets out a muffled moan, not releasing her own bite's grip. They both relish in the intimacy of the moment, sucking on each other's blood. The flavors that flow into their mouths. Akitani's RC cells and Himiko's sweet nectar. The ghoul had never tasted such blood before. It's like honey. Himiko is in a similar state of bliss. Akitani's blood is much better than any of the other people's blood that she drank. The two wrap their arms around one another, pulling their bodies closer. Neither wants to let the other loose, locking their jaws tight. Himiko's nails scrape Akitani like claws dragging across his skin. He too runs his fingers along the small of her back, like talons digging into flesh. Their moans increase in volume as they each share each other's blood. Bodies intertwined, Akatani's cocoon wraps around them both like a protective shell. Instead of tightening its hold, however, gently embraces the two. For once, Akatani doesn't feel so bad, allowing lust to overcome him. There's a ringing in his ears without the use of an alarm clock. That same piercing rumbling shakes up his stomach next. And so he wakes up as if there is an emergency, as if sleeping had suddenly become a dangerous thing. Considering his nocturnal nature and the lack of bed rest prior to now, he feels that may very well be true. His heart matches the throbbing rhythm with rapid thumps as the buzzing segues from his ears to his brain. Akatani feels as though he's hungover, an after effect of some sort of drunken state that leaves him woozy. When he shifts in the bed to sit up, his shoulder screams at him too. Wincing at the sharp sting, Akatani glances at the sore spot to see a bite mark. Suddenly, he's no longer delirious. The ambience fades and his vision focuses as he sobers up. He's awake and he's able to see that he didn't sleep alone. In the bed next to him is a familiar blonde, her usual buns undone and her hair a mess. The blood in his system goes to his face, making it a bright red hue. Her body is covered by the blankets and sheets, but his imagination gets the better of him. Turning away and smacking his cheeks to calm down, Akatani shakes his head to clear away those impure thoughts. He doesn't recall doing anything of S nature with her. Well, not in the ordinary sense at least. His eyes are drawn back to the bite mark on his shoulder. It still hasn't healed for some reason. Even if Himiko had bitten deep enough for it to scar, that shouldn't be. His quirk has been on the fritz for a while now. It may be from the lack of nourishment, he figures. However, even if that's the case, it's a tad bit concerning. The rustling of sheets behind him has Akatani snapping out of his thoughts and turning back around. Himiko stirs from her sleep, blinking back any remaining sleepiness. No breakfast? She asks in a drowsy voice. As flustered as he should be, Akatani keeps his mind honed on the most important factor of the blonde's presence. That was dangerous, what you did. He has to remind himself of the night before and the state he was in when she had found him. He was at his tipping point, and being as close as she was to him in such a starved state of mind, things could have gone horribly wrong as opposed to how things actually turned out. Himiko, however, doesn't quite comprehend the meaning of what he's saying. Misinterpreting his statement, she blushes a bit while averting her gaze. We didn't do anything that needed a condom. That's not what I meant. Akatani's eyes go wide as he flails his hands in a wild gesture to make her stop. While he may have been able to keep his embarrassment at bay before, that was enough to send him over the edge. His face heats up more than the girl's. But you should still take responsibility, Himiko carries on anyways. Whether she didn't hear the boy or just enjoys teasing him is unclear. Himiko, but Akatani eventually has enough. The blonde stops, hearing the severity in the tone of his shout. His blush fading, Akatani schools his expression and returns his gaze to hers. I could have gone too far. What if I didn't stop at drinking your blood? What if I? His voice trails off, getting caught somewhere in his throat. Now comprehending what he meant, Himiko takes Akatani's hands in hers in an attempt to console him. Hey, I'm still here. See, she gives them a soft squeeze to show him that she's alive and well. Sighing, he nods. Thank you for being here. He can't leave it at that though, but I still think it was too dangerous. He looks deep into her eyes. He has to let her know that she can't do anything like she did last night ever again when he gets like that. Himiko hums, staring back at him. After a moment, she breaks the contact to glance at her shoulder. There's a specifically shaped mark there that matches the one on Akatani's shoulder. Well, you did bite pretty deep. You leave one heck of a hickey, Akatani. She returns to teasing him in an attempt to lighten the mood. It works. Sort of. Akatani pulls away, embarrassed and flustered. I gotta call somebody back. He uses his phone as an excuse while unplugging it from its charging cord. Seeing Himiko brows raised inquisitively, he elaborates, it was about Eri. The blonde instantly beams at that. Oh. Let me talk to her too. Let me say hi. She's throwing the sheets that cover her off, revealing a white t-shirt with kanji that reads, pajamas. Recognizing the shirt as one of his own, Akatani swivels his body to face the opposite direction. He hastily stammers, sure, before calling Aizawa back. After a few rings, the underground hero picks up. Surprisingly, his voice isn't that groggy. Problem child. You're lucky I'm up this early. Glancing around for a clock, Akatani winces slightly. Sorry, I just thought I'd return your call. I didn't really bother checking the time. He bashfully rubs the nape of his neck despite Aizawa not being able to see him. It's fine. There's nothing to apologize for. Aizawa is quick to allay the boy's worries though. Well, only momentarily. He's also quick to add, other than not calling before now. Where have you been? Oh, yeah, I've been. Akatani struggles for an answer as he tries to come up with a valid excuse or reason to his lack of contact. It's not like he can admit to having a breakdown to a licensed hero who reports to a detective that wants to lock him away. With the lack of an answer, Aizawa makes a guess. I've made a full recovery now if that's the reason why you've been avoiding me. I haven't been avoiding you. Akatani panics at the suggestion. Even if it is a little true. Whatever you say, Aizawa huffs. Hearing how much anxiety is in the boy's tone, the underground hero lets it go for the time being. My point is, you should be able to eat now without putting a strain on me. He instead gets back to the original purpose of their meetings. Akatani hesitates, searching for a response. Thank you. But, he's not so sure he's able to face the man after what he's done or if the eating regime that they develop will even work anymore. You can't tell me you aren't hungry still. Aizawa catches the hesitation in Akatani's tone immediately. Worried about his problem child, he asks, you haven't been doing anything to hold yourself over, have you? No. Akatani shouts a little too forcibly. He grimaces at how hasty he was with his response before toning it down, I mean. No. His eyes are drawn to Himiko who's been listening in on their conversation the whole time with mild intrigue. My, friend. The blonde frowns. My girlfriend, he tilts his head hopefully. Her frown diminishes and she nods. Hi. She cranes her neck forward to be heard through the phone. I wasn't aware that you weren't alone. Aizawa somehow manages to sound both amused and annoyed. She helps. I mean, her quirk. It can. Akatani slaps a palm against his face when he realizes how terrible he is at communicating between his newly claimed girlfriend and technical probation officer. I don't need to hear the details. Aizawa cuts the boy short. Akatani holds back a sigh of relief, realizing the underground hero is probably just as at ease to drop the subject. He then asks, was she the one behind the blood bank idea? Remembering the time he and her broke into a blood bank, all Akatani can reply with is, oh. He doesn't want to get Himiko into trouble, but answers honestly anyways, yeah, that was her. I had a hunch, Aizawa says with a small smile on his face. Akatani can practically hear the expression on the man's face as he continues, it's better than the alternative, but don't do anything like that again. Yes, sir. Akatani allows himself to have a small smile too. So, are you absolutely certain that you don't want to come over for breakfast? The smile slips when Aizawa asks about eating again. Especially when he adds, Eri would love to see you. Akatani's grip on the phone nearly crushes it when he remembers the extent of his craving and what he had fantasized doing. There's no way in hell that he could put her in that type of danger. Could you just put Eri on the phone instead? He tries to keep his emotions in check but his voice comes out strained. Aizawa must notice by the way he pauses, but he's considerate enough to let it slide. Sure, kid. Akatani holds the phone away from his ear when he hears the sound of rustling and Aizawa calling out, Eri. It's for you, your brother. Akatani, followed by an even sharper shout from the little girl herself. Eri, hey. Akatani smiles again upon hearing her voice. He holds the phone closer to his ear now that she's talking. Dad said I'd see you soon. The sound of Aizawa choking on his saliva makes Akatani laugh. He wonders how long it's been since Eri started calling Aizawa that. She carries on cheerfully, oblivious to the man's coughing fit in the background, but it's been too long. I know. I wanna see you too. He turns when he feels a tap on his shoulder. Seeing his girlfriend standing behind him, he remembers that he isn't alone. So does Himiko. He gives her an apologetic look before holding out the phone for her. Hi, Eri. Himiko flashes her teeth as she grins and speaks into the phone. Big sis. Can she come too? Eri cheers loud enough for both of them to hear without it being on speaker. Akatani shouldn't be as taken back as he is, But it truthfully hadn't dawned on him that the two girls would be missing one another's company too. Well, he scratches the top of his head as his brain tries to process the request and the current situation. Of course I can, silly, Himiko replies just as cheerfully as Eri, as though any other option wasn't even to be considered. This only further eggs Eri on, yay, leading her to ask, when, Akatani, when? When her older brother doesn't respond immediately or as excitedly as the two girls, Eri's tone becomes slightly discouraged and asks again, Akatani. Though Eri is unable to see the boy's expression, Himiko can. And what she sees is concerning to say the least. The blonde worriedly asks too, Akatani, reaching out a hand to touch him. Unexpectedly, he stands up straight, making her flinch back. He keeps his expression the same but talks in a relatively even voice, it's probably gonna be a while, Eri. Oh. Eri tries to keep the whining to a minimum but her disappointment is evident. Whatever face Akatani had been making falters. The cracks in his mask expose a sorrow. A trace of remorse and a wrinkle of regret trail down each of his cheeks like tears. But I want you to remember I'll always love you. You're my little sister. Even if I'm not there, I'll be keeping you safe. His voice cracks just the same as he tries not to expose his feelings any more than he already is. Eri's excitement reignites, mistaking his words for a different meaning, you're gonna be a hero. Not wanting to break her heart with an honest answer, but not wanting to lie, he refrains from responding. Instead, he says, I've gotta go, Eri. Oh, okay. Eri's mood plummets all over again on the wild rollercoaster of emotion that she's riding. Wanting to save her from any more letdowns, Akatani decides it's best to just end their call. Goodbye. It comes out as a whisper but Eri hears it. She starts to bid farewell back, bye, but Akatani hangs up before she can. Watching the entire exchange and the boy's stricken expressions, Himiko reaches out with a tender hand. This time, he doesn't spook her by making any sudden movements. He stays as stiff as a stone statue. Akatani, what was that about? Her face scrunches up with concern as she tries to study him more closely. When Akatani's eyes meet hers, she thinks that she understands. I'm not going to get my hunger under control and I won't put her in that kind of danger. I'd never be able to forgive myself. He's still wary of his own quirk and doesn't want to put Eri at risk. You need to stop worrying about hurting us, Himiko starts to assure him otherwise but he has none of it this time. You know what I'm capable of, he knocks her arm away and pulls back. Before he can go on a rant about his quirk and the dangers of its drawbacks, he realizes that the blonde is hanging her head. Sorry, I didn't mean. He tries apologizing but Himiko raises her head and fires back. You're forgetting that it's because of who you are and what you can do that I like you. He's shocked by her words and the passionate way that she says them. Remember. You saved me. You saved Eri. Like it or not, you're basically a hero. But he's still not hearing what her or anyone else has to say. He shakes his head, thinking bitterly that they'll just never understand. A hero? Huh? He scoffs but feigns a smile for Himiko anyways, thanks for not giving up on me. The blonde frowns, gaze lowering. It falls and lands on his shoulder, where she left her mark on him. Akatani notices where she's staring and looks at hers. Each of them blush, but she doesn't pass up the moment. She bumps her shoulder against his, leaning into him, you're stuck with me now. Akatani locks up, not sure how to react. But after a moment, his body relaxes. He closes his eyes and sighs. Conflicted with wanting to be happy with her but also wanting to keep her safe, he tries moving forward with his newfound plan. Himiko, if I'm a hero, then. You remember what I wanted to meet Dabi for, right? His eyes reopen to look at her seriously. Himiko looks up, staring back questionably, that League of Villains thing. Akatani nods, stealing his resolve. I want to find them. They're a danger to Eri. And like I told her, even if I can't be there for her, I'll still continue to keep her safe. He decides right then and there what he's going to be from now on. The ghoul is a monster that had been villainized, but he can at least aim that beast towards those who deserve it. Against Aizawa's better judgment, Akatani is going to leave behind his life at Anteiku and commit to being a vigilante. Seeing the determination in his eyes, Himiko can't help but gush in awe. Such a cool big brother. Her face starts to heat up and she grins before grabbing onto his arm to steer him. Guess I gotta step up and do my part as her big sister. She begins pulling him towards the door so that they can start their new life together. Come on, Akatani. Let's catch a train to Hosu and find those villains, before either of them can back out and regret the decision too early. Blue hues blend with the black of the night, each blinding array of building lights whizzes by outside the window of the train. The passenger car rocks back and forth on the tracks. With Himiko resting her head on his shoulder, it's almost soothing enough for Akatani to relax. Almost. He can't quite allow himself to enjoy the moment. Not after essentially leaving his whole life behind. Again. He can't help but wonder what Eraserhead and the pro-hero's detective friend will think. Or Yoshimura. Or the friends that he made, Todoroki and Shinso. Or Eri. Akatani's head lolls to the side, resting atop Himiko's. He at least allows himself to brood a bit. He thinks about where he's headed instead. Even though that's no better or worse of a thought. He's headed straight for the Inferno, taking the train into Hosu with Himiko to find the League of Villains. Since the hero killer's activity there increased, it seems like the most likely place to find criminals lurking about. Birds of a feather flock together and all that. As a predator, it's easier to hunt and catch prey in packs rather than individually. The odds of snagging at least one from a group is higher than chasing a single target. Akatani just didn't expect to enter a literal inferno. The blue tint outside the train car's window shifts shades of color, from yellow to orange to red. Akatani sits up straight when other people in the car start to murmur over the light show, waking Himiko. Orange and red flares warp the city lights, growing brighter. It takes the spectators too long to realize why. A ball of flame is hurtling towards them, growing closer and burning harder. Akatani wraps his arms around Himiko to shield her, twisting their bodies away from where the ball of fire collides with the train car. Screams fill the metal container as glass shatters and shards spray across the tiny space. Those same yells are drowned out by the shrill sound of wind being sucked in and out of the giant hole that's been made. Akatani looks up to see what made such damage. A humanoid with green skin as pale as a dying leaf crouches down on all fours. Akatani notes that the being's brain is exposed, 4 eyes protruding from the organ. All they got on are grey trousers that are ripped at the calves. Akatani reaches into the back pocket of his own pants, feeling the leather of his mask. He's not sure whether what's attacking is human or something else, but his fight or flight response is telling him to fight. Akatani. Himiko squirms from under the boy's weight, but her indignant whines are more from a place of worry for him than uncomfortability. The other passengers of the damaged train car let loose a round of reactive noises again upon witnessing Akatani's slight transformation. The long sleek appendages that sprout from the small of the boy's back whip side to side as he pulls on his mask. He leaves the zipper open, baring his teeth like fangs. The red of his Kakugan glows brighter than his Kagoon, but he's just as bloodthirsty as ever. The humanoid shrieks at the ghoul, a visceral sound that makes everyone cover their ears but the ghoul himself. From under Akatani, Himiko tries grabbing onto an ankle to stop him from engaging it. But he's too fast. In one rapid and fluid movement, the ghoul tackles the humanoid creature through the hole that it created. They twist and flip in a fast freefall from the monorail to the grounds below, passing rooftops and plummeting straight for the earth. Registering the sudden change of events, Himiko is already standing up to hurry after them. Akatani, she calls after her boyfriend before leaping out of the cart willingly. Admittedly, she wasn't prepared to be woken from her sleep by a sudden villain attack. Now that she's gotten past her grogginess though, she's more than just grouchy. She's pissed. Nobody interrupts her beauty sleep and steals her boyfriend. The blonde unsheaths a knife that she keeps handy, landing in a roll on one of the higher rooftops. Her body aches from the rough tumble, but she catches herself and gets to her feet anyways. At the speed that the train was moving and how long it took for her to follow after Akatani, there's going to be some distance to travel before catching up with him. Though she's seen firsthand that he's more than capable of taking care of himself, she rushes to help him anyways. She has to close the distance as quickly as possible, because she cares too much about him to potentially lose him. As for Akatani, despite his blood and flesh withdrawal, he does handle himself well as Himiko had assumed. He binds the humanoid that he's fighting by its wrists and ankles with his predatory organ before attacking its exposed brain. His fingers claw at its open organ, ripping an eyeball loose. Gore spews across the alley that they had fallen into, filling the crater they made with a puddle of blood. The next impact in the ground comes from the humanoid alone, slammed into the cement by Akatani. It doesn't show signs of pain, just mere agitation as it tries to resist. The ghoul decides then and there that he doesn't have to hold back then. He latches onto the creature's throat, teeth sinking into its neck. Blood fills Akatani's mouth as the humanoid emits a gnarled gurgle from its damaged vocal cords. The bitten lashes out with a desperate swipe, backhanding Akatani across the chest. The humanoid has enough enhanced strength to knock the ghoul back. Akatani coughs as the wind gets blown from him, spit and blood flying out of his open mouth. The tentacles flailing after him stop his motion mid-air though, sparing him a second collision. One wraps around a nearby streetlight, using it as a pulley to launch the ghoul back at its opponent. A second swipe misses Akatani as he ducks under it, and with the humanoid's side exposed, he takes another chunk of its strange-colored flesh. It blubbers from its lips as it tries to yell, bringing its other arm down. Akatani catches it by the wrist, applying pressure. Whether the humanoid is just too strong or the ghoul is lacking the nourishment to match that strength, the bones don't bend or break, much to Akatani's surprise. In that moment of shock, he's delivered another blow to the abdomen. The ghoul bends backwards, shoulder scraping the ground, and then contorts to land on his side. Injured, his tentacles coil protectively around him like a shield. But in between those tails, a red iris peers out with an intent to get even. When he seethes through his teeth, it sounds like a hiss. Then, the ghoul is rushing the humanoid. A red limb snakes upwards and pierces a shoulder while another sweeps out the being's legs. Then Akatani jumps with his arms and legs spread, a battle cry descending on an exposed brain. Akatani grabs onto the humanoid, fingers digging into its skin and legs locking around its waist. His teeth gnash together as they grind its brain matter, the squishy mush slopping in big bursts. Even with its neck torn out, the humanoid screeches at the top of its lungs. It staggers as it tries to remain alive, but ultimately gets devoured by its much more dominant enemy. The ghoul feasts on the unfamiliar flesh of his victim, indifferent to the bitter flavor of its green pigmentation. The fair share of meat reminds him of what it's like to actually eat. It's more satisfying than coffee or blood quenching his thirst. It's liberating. And Akatani can't get enough. He shovels handfuls of severed tendons into his gullet, swallowing them whole without bothering to chew. Saliva drips down from his chin as he inhales the scent of exposed liver. All that's capable of drawing the ghoul away from its first true meal in a long time is the promise of more. The screeching of a winged humanoid draws Akatani's eyes to the sky where he can see it flying overhead. This one is a pale yellow, its skin just as sickly as the previous creature Akatani put down. That doesn't stop him from launching himself at it to get a bite in though. In one pressurized push from the gathering of his tentacle appendages, he shoots through the air and crashes into it. The two monsters roll through the sky before crashing through a window and into a dining room. A few occupants scream as a vicious brawl breaks out. Akatani rips a chunk of flesh from the winged humanoid using his teeth before lifting it up into the ceiling. Furiously flapping its wings in a futile effort to escape, the creature shrieks in desperation. The ghoul shows no mercy, bringing the fellow beast back down into the floor and then swinging it into a wall. The wild side-to-side ends with the two falling back out the window from which they came. Each brawler lands in the street, where more panicked bystanders flee from an intense wave of fire. Akatani reacts instinctively, not wanting to get caught up in the flames. His appendages pull him from the explosions and he lands on the other side of the road. It's from there that he can see the chaos that fills the night. More genetically engineered beings roam the city of Hosu, wreaking havoc. Heroes that Akatani recognizes from Endeavor's agency fight to hold them back as best as they can. Akatani ascends the nearest building to get a better view of the battle, unsure of how he should interfere. The fog in his mind is only now starting to clear enough for him to think. It begins to register that the creatures he and the heroes are fighting likely belong to the League of Villains he and Himiko are hunting. There's no other villain organizations at the moment and he knows personally from his own encounter with Stain that the hero killer works alone, so there's no other option. He watches as the creatures below attack indiscriminately. Even if it weren't his personalized mission to track and kill the League of Villains, they're a danger to the people that he can't ignore. Akatani leaps from his perched position, landing on a bleached white humanoid's back. Latched onto the creature like a spider or a tick, he takes a bite out of its nape. It reacts violently, pivoting its body while roaring. Unlike the prior two that the ghoul had fought, this one has an extreme muscle density to match its newfound opponent. It grabs Akatani and tosses him off. The ghoul somersaults as he flies through the air before planting his Kagoon into the ground to stop himself. Ready to go on his own rampage, the ghoul uses the assault of the humanoids as an opportunity to have a feeding frenzy. Akatani momentarily turns his attention away from the white one to grab an energy booster, a small one of the creatures, tearing out its heart to chew on. Then, the ghoul returns to its original target. The two clash, the white humanoid absorbing the impact and using the force of the blow to augment its muscles. The asphalt of the road cracks and crumbles as their weight shifts against one another. Then, an extreme air force is released from all the pent-up intake. Akatani is blown back just enough for the white humanoid to follow up with a surprising quirk, a tongue web combination that snares the ghoul. Akatani struggles against the net, growling. The creature cackles. The ghoul eyes the tongue wrapping him before realizing that it's organic matter and severs it with a bite. Blood splatters across the street as the tongue is ripped apart by the ghoul's manic snapping. The white humanoid retracts what remains, making an awful sound as it does. Akatani follows the tongue back to its owner, charging in again. A hard dropkick smashes the creature's exposed brain, pink mush spraying every which way in a mixture of blood. Its eyes ooze from the same placement, rolling out of their sockets. Grinning at his fallen prey, Akatani dives in for his reward. The brain matter squishes between his teeth and the muscle fibers ooze with blood. The satisfying meal leaves more to be desired. But the remaining humanoids are already being dealt with. The heroes have restrained the weaker ones, all that remains a duplicate of the white creature. It likely outclasses them, but not Endeavor himself. The number 2 ranked hero arrives in a glowing burst of fire, his health flame completely cauterizing the remaining creature. It's destroyed beyond repair, flesh bubbling and blistering. Not even Akatani would want to eat the burnt to a crisp being. Endeavor stands over the defeated monster victoriously, one boot atop its corpse. He surveys the property damage and his sidekicks, eyes eventually landing on Akatani. When the two meet each other's gaze, an immediate understanding of what's about to happen reaches them. Endeavor doesn't bother evacuating the area or warning anyone, he just instantly launches an attack. Akatani's single exposed eye widens as he watches a tsunami of fire head his way. Though just a kid, and though Endeavor being quite a literal hothead, he supposes he can understand why the hero decided it was a good idea to attack him. For starters, he had been eating the corpse of one of the monsters terrorizing the city. Not to mention the leather ghoulish visage mask that he's wearing. It doesn't exactly give him a good look. But still, he can't believe the guy didn't even hesitate. Akatani springs from his spot, coiling his limbs around a street post. The metal becomes superheated from the massive wave of fire that Endeavor unleashes, making him move from it to the next just as quickly. But Endeavor doesn't let up, he hurls a line of fireballs at the scurrying boy too. The ghoul hastily scrambles alongside the wall of an apartment complex to dodge the miniature explosions and takes another leap of faith to get away. But there's no fleeing from this fight. Endeavor is on him in an instant, flashing from one spot to the next to cut off his path. Akatani curses under his breath as the hero closes the distance. Unable to evade the incoming punch and becoming increasingly desperate, the ghoul does what any cornered animal would do. He bites. He catches the hero's burning fist in his mouth, sinking his teeth into the man's knuckles. Both Endeavor and Akatani feel an intense pain from the mixed contact. Endeavor reels from the bite with a shout, shocked to find his hand mangled. Akatani goes from seething through a mouthful of fire to sputtering and gagging as his lips hiss. Having his mouth burnt has the ghoul spitting out blood before he closes the zipper that exposes it. Having his knuckles chomped on makes Endeavor see red, his fist reclenching despite the pain it radiates in a burst of flame. Luckily for Akatani, and unluckily for the number 2 hero, it's right at this very moment that Himiko Toga finds her boyfriend. She strikes at Endeavor with her knife, catching him off guard just enough to cut his chest a bit. In that single fluid arriving motion, the blonde also grabs Akatani and roughly pulls him back. The two put some distance between themselves and the hero, landing behind a crushed car. Himiko, Akatani exclaims in as much surprise as Endeavor is to have been cut by a girl in a school uniform. Himiko whirls on Akatani, exasperated and out of breath from having to get here. What kind of hot mess did you get yourself into? The boy watches Endeavor charge up another attack, grabbing onto Himiko and pulling her from their cover to behind another car in order to avoid the incoming move. I don't really have an answer for that, he replies through gritted teeth as an explosion shakes the place that they once were. Endeavor isn't holding back. He's showing no mercy. He stomps towards them with heavy footfalls, boots burning into the pavement. You're not getting away. His tone is as serious as his hyper-focused expression. Himiko rebrandishes her knife, leaping up from behind the car in between her and the hero. Wanna bet, she's just as angry as the number 2 hero and charges in headfirst. Endeavor meets her halfway, flames igniting from the palms of his hands as he reaches for her. As the burning limbs close in, he growls under his breath, only if it's your life that's at stake. If it hadn't been evident enough before, Akatani now realizes that the so-called hero isn't looking to capture them. His girlfriend's life is at stake. No. He leaps over the car in his way to help, but he's too far behind. He fears he isn't going to make it in time. Fortunately enough, somebody else does. A red blur swoops in at the last second, swapping places with Himiko. Akatani recognizes the scarf before he does the jagged blade that's blocking Endeavor's attack. The hero killer, Stain, has come to their rescue. Endeavor pivots back from the sudden strike and Stain sweeps his sword out to get one final lick in that manages to nick the hero's cheek. Akatani lands beside the hero killer, catching the tail end of his sentence. Been looking forward to hunting you most of all, Endeavor. Stain pauses when he notices the ghoul's arrival and diverts his attention just enough to acknowledge the presence. You again. There are many things Akatani wants to say and do in that moment, many of them conflicting with the other. However, the main thing that's on his mind is his girlfriend's safety. So what he chooses to do is bow. Thank you for saving her. Stain grunts, sparing a quick glance at the blonde that he rescued. Get her out of here. This fight is mine now. And then he returns his attention back to the flaming hero he's about to face in combat. You must be the hero killer. Endeavor is just as intently focused on his opponent. The fire encompassing his body increases in output in a threatening display of power. Your reign of murder ends here. Stain matches the energy with his own, bloodlust radiating from the end of his blade when he points it directly at Endeavor. His tone holds more animosity and hatred than Akatani could manage as he boldly replies, just try it, you fake. Already predicting Endeavor's next move, Akatani dives for his girlfriend to shield her from the incoming blast. Himiko, he calls out to her as his tentacles reach to make a shield. The raging inferno consumes the area around them and they're engulfed in hell's flames. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.